Good evening, everyone. My name is Quinn, and I am a bookseller here at the Reading Room CLE. Today, I am going to read you an essay about reading by Eudora Welty. It is called A Sweet Devouring, which I believe is also the activity that Cha-Cha is engaged in right now. Our library in those days was a big rotunda, lined with shelves. A copy of Vivi's Eyes seemed to follow you wherever you went, even after you'd read it. I didn't know what I liked. I just knew what there was a lot of. After Randy's spring, there came Randy's summer, Randy's fall, and Randy's winter. True, I didn't care very much myself for her spring, but it didn't occur to me that I might not care for her summer, and then her summer didn't prejudice me against her fall, and I still had hopes as I moved on to her winter. I was disappointed in her whole year, as it turned out, but a thing like that didn't stop me from wanting to read every word of it. The pleasures of reading itself, who doesn't remember, were like those of a Christmas cake, a sweet devouring. The Randy books failed chiefly in being so soon over. 4 seasons doesn't make a series. All that summer, I used to put on a second petticoat. Our librarian wouldn't let you pass the front door if she could see through you. Ride my bicycle up the hill and through the Capitol, shortcut to the library with my 2 red books in the basket. 2 was the limit you could take out at one time when you were a child, and also as long as you lived. And tiptoe in, silence, and exchange them for 2 more in 2 minutes. Selection was no object. I coasted the 2 new books home, jumped out of my petticoat, read. I suppose I ate and bathed and answered questions put to me. Then, in all hope, put my petticoat back on and rode those 2 books back to the library to get my next 2. The librarian was the lady in town who wanted to be it. She called me by my full name and said, "Does your mother know where you are? You know good and well the fixed rule of this library. Nobody is going to come running back here with any book on the same day they took it out. Get both those things out of here and don't come back till tomorrow, and I can practically see through you." My great aunt in Virginia, who understood better about needing more to read than you could read, sent me a book so big it had to be read on the floor, a bound volume of 6 or 8 issues of St. Nicholas from a previous year. In the very first pages, a serial began, The Lucky Stone by Abby Farwell Brown. The illustrations were right down my alley. A heroine so poor she was ragged, a witch with an extremely pointed hat, a rich, crusty old gentleman in, better than a wheelchair, a runaway carriage, and I set to. I gobbled up installment after installment through the whole luxurious book, through the last one, and then came the words, "Turning me to unlucky stone, to be concluded." The book had come to an end, and the lucky stone wasn't finished. The witch had it. I couldn't believe this infidelity from my aunt. I still had my secret childhood feeling that if you hunted long enough in a book's pages, you could find what you were looking for. And long after I knew books better than that, I used to hunt again for the end of The Lucky Stone. It never occurred to me that the story had an existence anywhere else outside the pages of that single green-bound book. The last chapter was just something I would have to do without. Polly Pepper could do it. And then suddenly I tried something. I read it again, at least as much as I had of it. I was in love with books at least partly for what they looked like. I loved the printed page. In my little circle, books were almost never given for Christmas. They cost too much. But the year before, I'd been given a book and got a shock. It was from the same classmate who had told me there was no Santa Claus. She gave me a book, all right. Poems by Another Little Girl. It looked like a real book. It was printed like a real book. But it was by her. Homemade poems? Illusion dispelling was her favorite game. She was in such a hurry. She had such a pile to get rid of. Her mother's electric runabout was stacked to the bud vases with copies that she hadn't even time to say Merry Christmas. With only the same raucous laugh with which she had told me, I've been filling my own stocking for years, she shot me her book, received my Japanese pencil box with a moonlit scene on the lid and a sharpened pencil inside, jumped back into the car, and was sped away by her mother. I stood right where they had left me, on the curb in my little nurse's uniform, and read that book. And I had no better way to prove when I got through than I had when I started that this was not a real book. But of course it wasn't. The printed page is not absolutely everything. Then this Christmas was coming, and my grandfather in Ohio sent along in his box of presents an envelope with money in it for me to buy myself the book I wanted. I went to Cress's. Not everybody knew Cress's sold books, but children just before Christmas know everything Cress's ever sold or will sell. My father had showed us the mirror he was giving my mother to hang above her desk, and Cress's is where my brother and I went to reproduce that by buying a mirror to give her ourselves, and where our little brother then made us take him, and he bought her one his size for 15 cents. Cress's had also its version of the series books, called, exactly like another series, The Campfire Girls, beginning with The Campfire Girls in the Woods. I believe they were 10 cents each, and I had $1, but they weren't all that easy to buy because the series stuck, and buying some of it was like breaking into a loaf of French bread. Then after you got home, each single book was as hard to open as a box stuck in its varnish. When it gave way, it popped like a firecracker. The covers, once prized apart, would never close. Those books, once open, stayed open and lay on their back, helplessly fluttering their leaves like a turned-over June bug. They were as light as a matchbox. They were printed on yellowed paper with corners that crumbled if you pinched on them too hard, like old graham crackers, and they smelled like attic trunks, caramelized glue, their own confinement with one another, and overall, the Cress's smell, bandanas, peanuts, and sandalwood from the incense counter. Even without reading them, it was hard that year that Christmas was a day you can't read. What could have happened to those books? But I can tell you about the leading character. His name was Mr. Holmes. He was not a campfire girl. He wanted to catch one. Through every book of the series, he gave chase. He pursued Bessie and Zara, those were the campfire girls, and kept scooping them up in his touring car while they just as regularly got away from him. Once Bessie escaped from the second floor of a strange inn by climbing down a gutter pipe. Once she escaped by driving away from Mr. Holmes in his own automobile, which she had learned to drive by watching him. What Mr. Holmes wanted with them, either Bessie or Zara would do, didn't give me pause. I was too young to be a campfire girl. I was just keeping up. I wasn't alarmed by Mr. Holmes. When I cared for a chill, I knew to go to Dr. Fu Manchu, who had his own series in the library. I wasn't fascinated either. There was one thing I wanted from those books, and that was for me to have 10 to read at once. Who in the world wrote those books? I knew all the time they were the false campfire girls, and the ones in the library were the authorized. But book reviewers sometimes say of a book that if anyone else had written it, it might not have been this good. I found it out as a child. Their warning is justified. This was a proven case, although a case of the true not being as good as the false. In the true series, the characters are either totally different or missing. Mr. Holmes was missing, and there was too much time given to teamwork. The Cress's campers, besides getting into a more reliable kind of trouble than the Carnegie campers, had adventures that even they themselves weren't aware of. The pages were in wrong. There were transposed pages, repeated pages, and whole sections in upside down. There was no way of telling if anything was missing, but if you know your way in the woods at all, you could enjoy yourself tracking it down. I read the library campfire rolls, since that's what they were there for, but though they could be read by poorer light, they were not as good. And yet, in a way, the false campers were no better either. I wondered whether I felt some flaw at the heart of things, or whether I was just tired of not having any taste, but it seemed to me when I had finished that the last 9 of those books weren't as good as the first one. And the same went for all series books. As long as they are keeping a series going, I was afraid, nothing can really happen. The whole thing is one grand prevention. For my greed, I might have unwittingly dealt with myself in the same way Maria Edgeworth dealt with the one who put her all into the purple jar. I had received word that it was just colored water. And then I went again to the home shelves, and my lucky hand reached and found Mark Twain. 24 volumes, not a series, and good all the way through. Most of Eudora Welty's works are available for free on the internet. You can find them and this book wherever books are sold. Cha-Cha and I are going to take the rest of the evening to read quietly to ourselves. We will see you tomorrow night for another bedtime story for tiny dogs. In the meantime, have a good day and keep reading.